So, for these 2 weeks, we're going to study demons. We had, if I remember correctly, we had 4 weeks about good angels, 6 weeks on Satan, and we're going to do these 2 now on demons. The reason I say these are probably the 2 most interesting weeks is because the majority of what you probably know about demons you learned in the movies, or a comic book, or some other media, or you simply grew up believing that, yes, a cracked mirror is 7 years of bad luck. Who doesn't believe that? That's what your mother did. Yeah, the second book of opinions, that's like verse 4, if I remember right. And so when I looked at how we would cover such a broad subject as the demons, partly they've been covered as we went through looking at the fallen angels and Satan. And as I said at the opening of the lesson that we sent out, broadly we know a lot about the demons already from our study. We know that Satan rose up against God and then went around, and the Bible says, trafficked with angels, and a large number of them followed Satan and believed, yes, Satan could be like God, Satan could be above God, and they liked what Satan was telling them. You know, hey, if you and your forces will follow me, I'll make you the Prince of Persia. You and your I'll make you this, I'll give you that, I'll do these things. And as we saw last week, when Satan led Christ up to a high place and showed him the kingdoms of the world from beginning to end, and said, I'll give you these things if you'll, basically pledge your allegiance to me. The only reason that that was a temptation for Christ is that Christ knew Satan had that in his power to do. So the same thing, Satan went around sort of blowing in the ear of the angels, trying to get them all to follow him. What he was promising them were things that they knew he could deliver. And so as a result of that sort of revolt in heaven, we end up where we are today with Satan and the demons. Some things to remember again before we get started. We've talked about several times. One is Satan's biggest lie is to get the world to believe that he doesn't exist at all, that the whole thing is fiction, people are foolish for believing in Satan and all that stuff. Second, he is the father of lies. Lies, deceit, deception are his trade. And if you've ever been deceived into believing anything, you know that that's a very subtle thing. The world tries to paint Satan as this in-your-face, red-faced, pitchfork, evil-looking, coming out of the alien's chest kind of thing. Where, no, the Bible says Satan's the most beautiful thing God created. And he's a subtle father of lies. The demons are going to be the same way. They're following him. They're going to have the same traits. They're going to be liars. They're going to be deceivers. The same thing. They're not going to want you to know they exist and are around us all the time. Third, Satan isn't omnipresent. Satan is not everywhere all the time. He is roaming about, trying to find a good target, but he is not present everywhere all the time. Neither are the demons. Satan doesn't know everything. They are very intelligent, but he's not all-knowing. He's not all-powerful. Satan or the demons can't force you to do one single thing. What does Christ tell you about temptation relative to yourself in the Bible when you're tempted? What does it say? It says, I won't allow you to be tempted more than you can resist. They can't force you to do anything. You can be so driven by lust of whatever it is you want to do, lust of the eye, the pride of life, lust of the eye, lust of the flesh. You can be so driven by those things that you feel like you're being coerced, but it's you. We look at Adam and Eve in the garden. Eve was at fault, so was Adam. He should have just stayed in his recliner and he would have been fine, see. They were at fault. Now, Satan got punished too, but God held Eve and Adam responsible for their sin. We're the same way. So they can't make you do anything. Remember that. And they don't have the power you think they do. They have a lot of power, but they don't have near the power that you think they do. We are influenced a lot by the media. And today we have a ton of media. You know, back a few hundred years ago, it was probably just writing. But we're influenced by the media, and the other thing we're influenced by is our ignorance. So if you want to go back, which is what we're going to do a little bit this morning, if you want to go back to Old Testament times when they didn't understand the law of gravity, or they didn't understand the effects of penicillin and antibiotics and all that, things that would happen that they couldn't understand, they immediately assumed were spirit-driven, and if it was a bad thing, it was obviously an evil spirit. And all cultures have been like that, whether it's the American Indian or the Asian or whatever. There's always been some spirit out there that causes good and bad, the whole yin and yang concept and so on. So we're influenced a lot by what we've heard or been taught or seen, not so much by what we've actually read in the Bible about demons. And so we're going to keep our study, it's going to be almost impossible, but we're going to try to stay focused on Scripture and what it says, and at the same time acknowledge what some of these false perceptions are of demons and so on. We'll really look at that next week in particular. So if you got the lesson, you can see on the board up here, demons fall into two categories, I guess is what I would call it. There's one of two missions or objectives for a demon. Now the fundamental goal of the demon is, is sort of in sync with Satan, to be the enemy of God. They are completely opposed to God. That is the very first rule. And then when you look at demons in the Bible, there are two kinds. There are the type, and that's what I have written up here, there are the type that their objective or their way of working is influence. These are the ones that are going to watch and look and observe and influence events either directly in your life or around your life that will cause you to do something. And those are the ones we're going to look at today. The second group of demons we see in the Bible are those who actually move in and live in a body. And they have certain things they do. And we will look at that next week, along with the whole how do you get rid of a demon and exorcism and all that stuff. So next week we'll have heads turned and pointing directly to the back of the room and then back to the front. This week we'll probably levitate some stuff and look at our rabbit's foots and those kinds of things. But when you're in the Bible, there are two, and that's influence and possession. And so this week we're going to look at influence and what that's all about. So when we talk about influence, I'm going to put this down or I'll spill it somewhere. When I realized I was going to have maybe 40 minutes to talk about influence, wow, trying to narrow that into just 40 minutes is something. So I picked divination. Why would I pick divination as a way that demons influence us? Of course, you'd have to understand what the word divination is to begin with. Maybe that's part of the problem here. It's witchcraft. It's all the things. Again, we're going to go down through this list of definitions this morning. But we're going to look at the world of divination, palm reading, crystal balls, a lot of other bizarre things you didn't even realize was in the Bible. And what divination is in the big sense is we have a question and we want an answer to that question, and we go to one of these sources to get that answer. A real easy example of that is your horoscope. People that are addicted to these horoscope things, and should I even go to work today, or am I going to get that promotion, or should I marry that guy, or should I buy that car, or whatever the case is. I believe there's a fairly well-known story about Ronald Reagan in the White House. You all familiar with that? Anybody?
With Nancy Reagan.
Nancy Reagan, yeah. And what would Nancy do?
She'd call up people, right?
She would have them bring a Ouija board into the Oval Office to determine whether he should travel or not. And it was fairly well known. In fact, at one point, they wrote an article about it because she didn't see anything wrong with it. And both of them are professed born-again Christians. So we're going to look at that example at the end of the lesson today. But just as an example, that's what happens. Another example, sports figures. What do sports figures do that would fall into this area? Pray to God. That's I always like that one. I always like that. It's nice that the team prays and gives God the glory. Of course, those loser Christians at the other end, we just beat, who also prayed. What does that tell you about God and his relationship with them, you know? But no, that isn't right. Yeah. They have all these rituals, good luck charms. They don't change their socks for 4 weeks because they'll lose if they do. And bizarre things, you know. They make a rabbit's foot look goofy. Sports is just loaded with these weird superstitions, I guess is the word to put it. And superstition is one of the areas we're going to look at this morning. So with that, I ask you to find a definition for the word divination. I didn't hear a unanimous shout out back out, but what divination is again, you want to get something answered, and you want to go to the spirit world to get that answer. Because a lot of us, should I buy a car or something, maybe you'd talk to your next door neighbor and see if he'd owned one. Or maybe if you're really smart, you'd get a couple of Christians together and say, here are my finances, is this the right thing to do or not? But a lot of people, when they're getting ready to make some kind of a decision, will seek out the spirit world to tell them sort of a future event. And they're either looking for a prediction of something, or they're looking for, should I fight that battle? Should I marry that person? Should I take that job? That's divination in its broadest sense, or spiritism, some people call it. And then under that umbrella is a whole series of things that I wanted us to look at this morning. So who has Ezekiel 21:21? And the first word that we're going to look at this morning, if I can remember how to spell it, is it T-O-S? C-O-P-Y. Is that right? Yeah. Hepatoscopy. Gesundheit. So, somebody would read Ezekiel 21:21.
For the king of Babylon will stop at the fork in the road, at the junction of the two roads, to seek an omen. He will cast lots with arrows. He will consult his idols. He will examine the liver.
He's got to examine the what? Ooh. Let's gut us an animal and look at its liver, and that'll tell me what I should do next. And it's a very common, it's mind-boggling. What did Johnny Carson say about what happens when you come to the fork in the road? Take it. Okay, that's as far as the humor goes today. You've heard the best I got. Yeah. Who would have ever known this even existed? And yet it's in the Bible. And oh, by the way, if you look across Far Eastern religions and things, you'll find even more bizarre things than this. Easy one is tea leaf reading, for instance. So we have hepatoscopy or something like that. Okay, the next one we have is augury, and there is actually an example of it in the Bible, and I didn't put the reference down, but does anybody know what augury is? And no, it doesn't mean digging a hole in the ground. A-U-G-U-R-Y. Through water? Okay, that's not the one I had, but very good. Yeah. It's the flight of birds. They look at how birds are flying, or where they're flying, or how high they're flying, or the formation they're flying in, or the fact that a bird flew by when I was asking for the answer, and that's augury. And it's in the Bible. I apologize, I didn't write the example down. All right, now we have another good one. I think it's hydro. I think we're coming to Judy's now. Hydromancy. So if someone would read Genesis 45. Yeah.
Doesn't my master drink from
Yep. So this is looking into water, seeing the future, answering a question. Remember, kids, you had the black balls. Everybody remember that? You know what I'm talking about? Should I go to school today? Oh, Mom, look, it says. You know, we think these are, some of them I actually chuckle over. The liver one blew me away. The sad part is, even today, people put a lot of stake in these things. It's like magic potions, you know, Eye of Newt and all this stuff. What are they killing? Is it the white rhino gets killed for its horn because if they ground it up, it has some magic power to it, that kind of stuff. And this is going on today. This isn't even 5,000 years ago. Okay. I'm sorry?
I think the demonic world acts through these methods.
I'm sorry, acts through them? Oh, sure they do. Oh, we're going to read many examples of this. So now here's a real good one. You can figure out probably just from the name. I pronounce it necromancy, or it could be necromancy. I don't know exactly. And we have actually scripture for that one. I did write down 1 Samuel 28, 7-25. Very, very well-known story.
Okay, I think this is Saul here. He inquired of the Lord, but the Lord did not answer him by dreams or Urim or prophets. Saul then said to his attendants, "Find me a woman who is a medium, so I may go and inquire of her."
Yeah, through 25.
Oh, through 25. Okay. There is one in Endor, they said. So Saul disguised himself, putting on other clothes, and at night he and 2 men went to the woman. "Consult the spirit for me," he said, "and bring up for me the one I name." But the woman said to him, "Surely you know what Saul has done. He has cut off the mediums and spiritists from the land. Why have you set a trap for my life to bring about my death?" Saul swore to her by the Lord, "As surely as the Lord lives, you will not be punished for this." Then the woman asked, "Whom shall I bring up for you?" "Bring up Samuel," he said. When the woman saw Samuel, she cried out at the top of her voice and said to Saul, "Why have you deceived me? You are Saul." The king said to her, "Don't be afraid. What do you see?" The woman said, "I see a spirit coming up out of the ground." "What does he look like?" he asked. "An old man wearing a robe is coming up," she said. Then Saul knew it was Samuel, and he bowed down and prostrated himself with his face to the ground. Samuel said to Saul, "Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up?" "I am in great distress," Saul said. "The Philistines are fighting against me, and God has turned away from me. He no longer answers me, either by prophets or by dreams, so I have called on you to tell me what to do." Samuel said, "Why do you consult me now that the Lord has turned away from you and become your enemy? The Lord has done what he predicted through me. The Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hands and given it to one of your neighbors, to David. Because you did not obey the Lord or carry out his fierce wrath against the Amalekites, the Lord has done this to you today. The Lord will hand over both Israel and you to the Philistines, and tomorrow you and your sons will be with me. The Lord will also hand over the army of Israel to the Philistines." Immediately Saul fell full length on the ground, filled with fear because of Samuel's words. His strength was gone, for he had eaten nothing all that day and night. When the woman came to Saul and saw that he was greatly shaken, she said, "Look, your maidservant has obeyed you. I took my life in my hands and did what you told me to do. Now please listen to your servant and let me give you some food so you may eat and have the strength to go on your way." He refused and said, "I will not eat." But his men joined the woman and urged him, and he listened to them. He got up from the ground and sat on the couch. The woman had a fattened calf at the house, which she butchered at once. She took some flour, kneaded it, and baked bread without yeast. Then she set it before Saul and his men, and they ate. That same night they got up and left.
That's through 25, right? Yeah. So for those of you who know the rest of the story, Saul dies the next day. And I picked this particular one because if I hadn't, it would have come up. This is the only known exception in the Bible of God allowing somebody, their spirit, if you will, to, quote, come back from the dead and talk to someone. And the reason people theorize, theologians anyway, theorize that this is in here is because God used this to speak directly to Saul. If we go back to one of the, I've quoted this I think almost every week, we go back to the parable Christ taught about Lazarus and the rich man, we learn a lot of things from that parable. One of the things we learn is we, as created beings, never die. We leave this body. We either go to be with the Lord, or we go to this place called Hades, awaiting judgment. You never die. And the wealthy guy, he shows up down there, and right away you would think, boy, he'd go, boy, I really messed up. What am I doing down here? No, he looks up and he sees Lazarus. There are so many truths revealed in this parable. It is incredible. And of course, what's he want? He wants Lazarus to come down. He thirsts and all this stuff, and we've talked about this before. If you're just a spirit, how are you thirsting and such? And I don't want to go through all that again today. But at the end of that parable, he says to God, let me out of here. I got to get up there and tell my brother about this place. And God says no. And of course, the reason he said no is because even if someone rose from the dead, referring to Christ, rose from the dead and told them so, they wouldn't believe it anyway, which they wouldn't have. But it's clear that once we physically die and leave this body, we're going to one of two places. That's it, and there's no communicating back to this life, period. And the other thing that was clear from that parable is while he was able to see Lazarus at peace in the bosom of Abraham, or in heaven, if you will, Lazarus was not able to see him. So, because how could it be heaven if we're in heaven watching all these people suffer in Hades or in the lake of fire and that sort of thing? So it's clear even within that world there are limitations. God is not going to allow the calling up of spirits for you to get an answer to something. Not going to allow it. Does that mean people will stop trying to do it? Does that mean that Satan and the demons won't come up with clever little ways to make you think they have? No, absolutely not. But the reality of it is there's only one example in all of God's Word where it actually happened, and that was Saul and Samuel as God spoke through him, and Saul's life was taken the next day. But this is an area, we are surrounded by folks who want to call up Uncle Frank or Aunt Millie or Abraham Lincoln, I don't know, and believe in these things. This is an area that it's around us. You may even have gotten caught up in it yourself at some point. You're not condemning anybody. I'm just warning you, the seeking the spirits of people who have deceased and departed is very prevalent even today. We tend to want to discount a lot of these goofy looking at your liver and things of that nature as old history, and they were silly back then and didn't know any better. But a lot of this goes on today in major ways and in high places. Ephesians 6, our struggle is not with flesh and blood. It's against evil and wickedness in high places. These kinds of things go on. They go on all around us. And weird things happen when they do. Just be cautious. We're going to read some more about that in a second. So, now we have a few examples of divination or spiritism, if you will, in the Bible. The first one being, we'd already read that one, Genesis 44:5. Jonah 1:7 and 8.
And they said to one another, come, let us cast lots, that we may know on whose account this evil has come upon us. So they cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. Then they said to him, tell us on whose account this evil has come upon us. What is your occupation, and where do you come from? What is your country, and of what people are you?
Yeah. So it's real common. There's lots of tarot cards and the throwing of tea leaves and all these bizarre things that if we do this, the answer will be revealed. This is just one example in the Old Testament. 2 Kings 2:1-5 is another good one.
In the two courts of the temple of the Lord, he built altars to all the starry hosts.
Is that 21:5? Okay. Yeah, and who was that? That bad king. That was one of God's chosen leaders, building altars to the stars. And now we're starting to head towards the whole horoscope thing and others reading the stars, and you don't have your children born unless certain planets are in alignment, and if your child was born and they were in this alignment, that's bad, and all of that. And they would take it one step further. What if they discovered that according to the stars or something, that the child was going to turn out not perfect or something? What do you think would happen?
They'd murder the child.
Yeah, sacrifice it to the gods, throw it to the fire. I mean, that was another, talk about weird thing. How can you be parents and allow yourself to be convinced that if you take one of your children and throw it into a fire, this is going to be the answer to your problems? Sad. We do it every day here.
The example in Jonah, they cast lots, and it did tell them there was an issue with Jonah.
Yeah, again, God was speaking through that event. Yeah, no,
There's-
absolutely.
There's
That-
examples of sacred lots being cast.
That's
in
correct.
New England.
Yeah, the only ones that that are in the New Testament where God used them is when the disciples were, what were the disciples doing? And they were to cast lot
Figuring out a successor.
who the new 12th apostle would be, if you will. So I said, and today we're even throwing our children in the fire. What was I referring to? Yeah, abortion. Oh, it's inconvenient. The child has this chromosome or some goofy thing, or the father's. And I won't get into the whole abortion thing. I taught a class on the value of life when I was in New Mexico in the early 90s. And I had someone, well, there's an organization out there that the children that don't want to have an abortion turn to this organization. Anyway, I had their lead spokesman come and speak to the class, and I forgot what the number was back then, but the number of aborted babies a month would blow your mind. Not to mention worldwide in a year. It's millions and millions and millions. It's not just a handful. I think we tend to think of abortion as something that happens to 1 out of every 1,000 people or something. It's a humongous number of babies getting aborted every year. And yet you wonder why we haven't found the cure for cancer, and we haven't found, how many geniuses are being thrown to the fire, if you will. Not to mention the fact that the whole abortion thing is taking the decision from God, and now you're playing God. Now, who would want us to do that? Satan. It's exactly what Satan wants. And he's a deceiver. So it's inconvenient for you. You're not ready to be a mother yet. You can't afford it. Abort this one. When the right person comes along, get married. Then you can have the children you're supposed to have. I mean, this is what the demons and Satan blow into your ear. It's just sad. Sad, sad, sad. Okay, enough of that. 1 Samuel, we did that one. 28:6. No, he did the other part. 2 Samuel 28, verse 6, which is the verse prior to what George read. I think it says second. Did I write first? 1 Samuel. I just brushed my teeth and I have no control over my mouth. 1 Samuel 28:6.
He inquired of the Lord, but the Lord did not answer him by dreams or prophets.
Yeah. So he tried to pray. Then he thought, okay, I'm going to dream. I mean, he's doing these things himself. I'm going to dream and the Lord will answer me through dreams. And he didn't get a satisfactory answer that way. And then he said, okay, I'm going to try the Urim and Thummim thing. What was the matter with the Urim and Thummim? I could never pronounce those two words right. What was the matter with him consulting the Urim and the Thummim, or whatever it's called? We must have some Jewish scholars in the room here.
David had it.
David had it? Had it? No. Only the high priest was to use the Urim and Thummim. And you remember Saul got into trouble that same area, right? Going in there offering his own sacrifice, all this. Saul thought himself above all this stuff. Gee, I wonder who else thinks that way, right? Clearly, he was being influenced by Satan and his demons. And yeah, he just ignored the role of the high priest, God's word about all that, then got frustrated when God wouldn't answer his prayer through all these things. And then that's when what George read, and he thought, heck with this then, I'm going to call Samuel up from the dead, and he'll tell me what's going on. It's bizarre. So, that was all in the Old Testament. We don't see any of that today. Nobody does any of these things. So who has 1 Timothy 4, 1 to 3? We're going to see what the New Testament tells us about this.
Now the Spirit expressly says that in the latter times some will depart from the faith, giving heed to deceiving spirits and doctrines of demons, speaking lies and hypocrisy, having their own conscience seared with a hot iron, forbidding to marry and commanding to abstain from foods which God created to be received with thanksgiving by those who believe and know the truth.
Yeah, and in fact, can you read that again? I want you to listen almost to every single word. Can you read that again?
Now the Spirit expressly says that in latter times some will depart from the faith, giving heed to deceiving spirits and doctrines of demons, speaking lies and hypocrisy, having their own conscience seared with a hot iron, forbidding to marry, and commanding to abstain from foods which God created to be received with thanksgiving by those who believe and know the truth.
That passage is full of wisdom. Oh my goodness, there is so much truth in there, it boggles the mind. First of all, understand right from the beginning, we're talking about the church here. And that people are going to sort of fall away from sound doctrine and take a lot of people with them. And when you listen to how those verses read, they're going to do it in a very subtle ways. It's going to seem pious. It's going to seem religious. It's going to have the look of, particularly you take even today. You look at the wild lifestyles around us, and this country where myself, a good example of that, battling with obesity and those sorts of things. Well, now you get a Christian faith that says, we shouldn't eat certain kinds of foods, and we shouldn't get married, and we shouldn't do, and you start going down this list of things that sound good. And you begin to teach that as Bible doctrine, and you begin to twist the truth, and the truth gets taught as a lie. And easy example I used a week or two back is, well, maybe the Virgin Mary wasn't a virgin, and it doesn't matter. She was the mother of Christ. That's all that matters. And you just start down that road. We have to be very careful. The Bible is clear all through the New Testament. As we get closer and closer and closer to the second return of Christ, the church gets further and further and further away from sound doctrine. I mean, it is scary, and it's this, you hear this slippery slope. I'm not even sure it's slippery. It's just a slope. Because you start compromising one little thing, you've compromised it all. And it's, as we said at the beginning, Satan and his demons are subtle. It's going to be a little twist here, a little twist there. Let's not eat a certain food. And there is and I'm not picking on religions today because but there are groups that are Christian that won't eat this or they won't eat that and so on. That's okay. That's their thing. When that begins to get taught as doctrine across a broad spectrum of Christian faith, we're in trouble. Whether it's something you abstain from eating or you should eat or you shouldn't. Then if you get down that road, then the church begins to say, you know what, you should only have 2.1 children. So if you have a third child, no, you got to give that up, or that means you get an abortion or whatever. I mean, all kinds of strange, weird things. Because we talked about this when we did the end time study. What's prevalent during the tribulation period that relates to what we're studying today? What's very prevalent during that 7 years? Talked about this a lot. Well, false teachers for sure, but no. By the time that 7-year period gets here, as a world, I guess, we have gone full circle and have completely adopted all of the weird, bizarre things we've studied this morning. Spiritism, divination is a way of life when Christ returns. Satan himself comes back through the Antichrist and says, watch what I can do, and changes the weather, tries to change the actual seasons of the year. Spiritism and divination is rampant. We looked, was it last week or the week before, the kings that he will put in place to help him in his world empire are going to be demon-possessed. These things are coming at us. They're not going to happen overnight. We're going to get all these little subtle things along the way, and that's what they're talking about in Timothy. And it happens in the church. We're not talking about the lost out there. We're talking about the church. I think it was Paul, could have been Timothy. I think it was Paul wrote about knowledge will increase, and many will go to and fro with an itching ear looking for somebody teaching what they want to hear. That's the church. It's not outside the church. That's the church. We've got to be very, very careful. We have to have, Paul said in Ephesians 6, have your feet shod in the gospel and hang on to the gospel. Don't believe what you see in movies. Don't believe what your neighbors tell you. Believe the Bible. This is how the Jews got in trouble when they moved into the Promised Land. They left the desert, grounded in the Word of God, got into the Promised Land, and over time, what did they do? What happened to them? Yeah, they started adopting the ways of the people around them. You got a Jewish sheep herder, and the Gentile guy that's got the 5,000 acres to the left of him starts reproducing. His sheep begin to reproduce twice as fast as the Jewish guy does. So the Jewish guy obviously goes over, what do you do? What do you feed them? Where do you graze them? How is it once a month I go down and I sacrifice to this idol. Or I shared a story in here before. I had a real estate agent one time told me if she gave me an idol. It was absolutely incredible. Christian woman, I might add, gave me an idol and said, you bury this in the backyard of the house you have for sale and it will sell in a heartbeat. Dead serious. Oh, she gives it to all of her clients. Still does, as far as I know. Pardon me? Oh, I don't know. It was just a little figurine carved out of wood and stick it in the ground. Yeah. Well, see, that's the problem. That was what Sherry and I struggled with. I didn't want it to start with. And she left it at the house. And I said, the problem we've got now is when that house sells, she's going to believe it. It doesn't matter. You could burn this thing. It isn't going to matter. And that's the problem. When people sell themselves out to these kinds of superstitions, they're sold out to them. That's the kind of stuff that's going on around us right now. Christian people. And the loss is bad enough. And so that's what happened to the Jews. My corn crop is now doubled because I went down to Esther, the goddess Esther, and sacrificed. I mean, this is why we have Esther bunnies with colored eggs and things. It actually is. Esther is where we get Easter from. And the reason that you have rabbits laying eggs is rabbits were seen as a symbol of fertility. And the egg was the beginning of life. And the more eggs that you had, then the more fertile you'd be, and so on. And that's how Easter came together. That is exactly why you get, now the jelly beans is a whole different story. But that's what happened to the Jews. They started looking at these things and they started picking up all these goofy, it's harmless. I still go to church on Sunday. I can plant this little thing over here in the field and God won't know it, and no effect. And we get sucked into the same dang thing. So we really got to watch it. Okay. And then finally, God has a word for us in closing as well. And I asked the last, what does God tell us as it relates to these things and our walk with Him? So the first one is Leviticus 19, verse 26, and then verse 31.
Okay, you shall not eat anything with the blood, neither shall you use enchantments, nor practice augury.
Okay.
Turn ye not unto them that have familiar spirits, nor unto the wizards. Seek them not out to be defiled by them. I am Jehovah your God.
Yeah. So we are to avoid all of this to begin with. God makes it very, very clear. What would be the fundamental reason we should avoid these things? It's the one fundamental reason we shouldn't be looking into these things.
I think there are, I don't know about one fundamental reason, but God absolutely hates it.
Mhm.
Not only is it, like I said, defiles us, because we are in seeking some a power other than God to seek the future, but it brings, it leads to death, not to life. When we seek God and seek His Spirit for
Mhm.
our future and direction, we're following God's path to life, the
Right.
path closer to His heart. When we seek His enemy for the answers, it leads us down the path to death. We end up following Satan's plan for our life. And he might bring what seems to be good at first to get us hooked, but in the end, we end up with death, with frustration, with enslavement to, to these spirits
Right.
that end up controlling us.
Yeah, excellent answer. What I was going to say is the fundamental reason God doesn't want us to do these things is we are then not dependent on God. I mean, the instant you start going somewhere else for an answer, whether it's through these things or you just decide on your own you know the answer, you're putting God second or you're putting him out of your life altogether. And he wants us to be dependent on him. And then her other point is absolutely right on. The difference between seeking an answer from God and seeking an answer from one of these things, you become a slave to these things. And after a while, you can't get away from it. It's almost like drug addiction, which is another whole area we could have went down. But yeah, no, right on. Absolutely right on. And then we got, we have Leviticus, we did that one. Leviticus 20, verses 6 and 27.
I will set my face against the person who turns to mediums and spiritists to prostitute himself by following them, and I will cut him off from his people. A man or a woman who is a medium or a spiritist among you must be put to death. You are to stone them. Their blood will be on their own heads.
Yeah. This is serious, serious stuff here. God is very straightforward with stay away, not only from asking these questions, but seeking these kinds of people out, not to associate with them whatsoever. And then finally, the other one I had was, no, we had two more. Deuteronomy 18, 10, and 11.
There shall not be found among you anyone who makes his son or his daughter pass through the fire, one who uses divination, one who practices witchcraft, or one who interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or one who casts a spell, or a medium, or a spiritualist, or one who calls up the dead.
Now, here's something that's just fascinating about that verse. When you read that verse, you believe it's telling you, to stay away from these things, and it is. It's telling us something else. Why would God be telling him to stay away from these things unless they all existed back then? I mean, these kinds of things were going on before God brought the Jews into the desert and then into the promised land. This sort of stuff has been going on almost since the days of Adam and Eve. All of these things. It's just incredible. I mean, when God brought the flood, we thought we got rid of all of that. Started all over with Noah. Go down a cul-de-sac for just a second. I have a humorous Noah story for you. One of the things I tell folks, I've said to coworkers from time to time, people are big on tracking their ancestry. And I've looked into mine a little bit, and I actually have been able to trace my ancestor back to Noah. The look I get at work from people, no, really? Oh, how did you do that? Well, my sister liked that line so much, she used it on somebody she knows, and they said, "Who's Noah?" We assume everybody knows the Bible and everybody knows God, and no, it blew my mind. Yeah. So, clearly, this was all going on back then, and God is very, very, and it's going on today, by the way. Solomon said there's nothing new under the sun. And then finally, our last verse, Isaiah 8:19.
When men tell you to consult mediums and spiritists who whisper and mutter, should not a people inquire of their God? Why consult the dead on behalf of the living?
Yeah. There's a verse in the Bible, God says, "I am the God of the living, not the dead." What a marvelous, marvelous verse. The first time I read that, because I thought then there is no death. If you're following in his step, if you have accepted Christ as your Savior, that is forever. The fact that this body finally gives out and we leave this body and go to some other place, our spirit, we did a whole thing about soul and spirit, our spirit lives on and will return in our resurrected body. And God's the God of the living. He is with us all through that. Again, go back to the whole Lazarus and rich man parable. What happened when Lazarus died? Angels came and carried him to heaven. We are going to be comforted by God, the good angels, and the Holy Spirit forever, beginning the moment you let him in your life. It never stops. So if he's the God of the living, what are you doing going and talking to the God, to dead spirits and things? Who would want to? Plus, who has control of all of that? Wouldn't you want to go to the person who has control of all those things? So really, I caution you, it's so easy to get caught up in those things. And sometimes it can be as silly as a good luck charm or an old superstition. You know, don't pick a penny up unless it's, what is it, heads up? Is that what the thing is? Or something like that. Don't walk under a ladder, especially if Wes is painting on it. Palm reading, seems real. You know, my mother went to a palm reader. Now, I'm the oldest of 11 children. I need to start there. My mother went to a palm reader when she was in high school, and or crystal ball or something. And just for a hoot, there was 2 girls on a weekend, you know, oh, let's go have our palm read. And the lady, I forget what all the lady told her, but at the end of it, because my mother gave her $2 instead of 1 or something, she said, I'm going to light a candle, and this will make sure that you are fertile when you get married and have children. And my mother told me one time after she'd had the 11th one, she wanted to find that lady and blow that candle out. So be careful. Tarot cards, all that junk, it seems harmless. It can quickly lead you into a very bad place. And so with that, let's stand. Jerry, how about if I ask you to close this morning?